Welcome to Mind the Gap in Digital Transformation. I'm glad to see everyone here. I know it's very early on a Friday morning, but I'm really pleased to see all of you, and I think we're going to have a great presentation. My name is James Gledhill. I'm Senior Digital Strategist at Small Footprint. I've been doing digital for over 20 years. I got my start as a digital producer and mostly with agencies and startups, but I've been an interim CEO. I've been Director of Digital Strategy. I've had a number of different positions. But what I learned as a digital producer, I spent a lot of time making projects that I knew were the wrong thing. I spent a lot of time with teams working very hard to put together stuff that just didn't turn out the way it needed to. And became pretty adept at noticing these things before we spent a lot of time on them. And that's really what drove me to digital strategy. I don't think I'm alone in that experience. So that's actually my first request for you guys, is how many of you have worked on a project, show of hands, and this is a safe place, how many of you have worked on a project that proved to be the wrong thing? Yeah. I'd like you to take a minute, turn to your neighbor, and I want you just to share a little bit about that experience. I'm going to ask for a brave volunteer or so in a second, but I'll give you a minute and just share a sentence or two about that experience. And again, this is a safe place. So. All right, I feel like I've got to use the microphone because you guys are so into this activity. I gave you the full minute. Before I ask somebody to share their experiences, I have a couple of examples I can share. And one of the things that I did work on an app once that was for a major automotive manufacturer, and it was an app for early version of the iPhone, but it was something where you could unlock the door on your car. And it was a very convoluted process to do that, and it was universally just not used. Another example was for a nonprofit, and was the idea they were doing a 5K in Hawaii, and what they wanted to do is they wanted people to be able to virtually participate in that 5K with VR headsets on treadmills. Right? So those are two of my embarrassing wrong projects. So let me actually ask the next question, and that is, anyone ever actually worked on the right thing? Great. Anyone? Again, I'm going to give you a chance to share that with each other. We're going to get positive here, and that's really what the rest of this presentation is going to be focused on, is making sure we're all working on the right projects. But I'll give you another minute. You guys did so great with the last exercise. Talk amongst yourselves. Starting the clock now. Okay. Who would like to share a story of a project that they're working on that, just again, one or two sentences of something that they're working on that is the right thing, they're positive? Or that they have worked on in the past that was the right thing? Anyone? Really? Okay. Well, hopefully we're going to turn that around. And at the end of this, you'll be in a much better place to make sure you guys are working on the right things. And we all are. And that's really what our goal is to get everyone working on the right projects. And that, to me, is what the purpose of digital strategy is. Purpose of digital strategy is to make sure we are building the right software for the future, for tomorrow. And I think it's important that really all of you being here, you are all digital strategists, right? That's why you showed up at this session at 8:30 on a Friday morning. And you wouldn't be here, and we're all here to make sure that we all want to work on the right things, right? With digital strategy, one of the first places people go to try to understand where they should be focusing their attention is, of course, on digital transformation. And this is a quote that comes from Greg Verdino. He's an author. He gets paid, a speaker. He gets paid quite a bit of money to go to international conferences and talk about digital transformation. And his definition of digital transformation is that digital transformation closes the gap between what digital customers expect and what businesses actually deliver. And that's a good rule. That's really fertile ground. There's lots of ways that we already know that our own companies don't meet the expectations of our constituents. It's not necessarily just customers, it can be employees as well, right? And this is the part of the presentation where a digital strategist, or Greg even, would get into talking about all the industries that have been completely disrupted by digital. Retail, entertainment, music, and we talk about the brands that had been giants, that had just failed to stay abreast of evolving customer expectations and no longer were relevant, right? But what's interesting, and what's easy to forget, is in the sands of time, even Blockbuster went into mail order, rental, subscription services. They even did video on demand, but they were way behind the curve. And I think this brings up what to me is a really limiting part of the way Greg defines digital transformation. And that's that how can we build the software of tomorrow if what we're focused on is meeting the expectations of today's users? So if this being the case, how can we know what to build in the future? How can we know what to build for tomorrow? And that's the transformative digital work. It really comes from redefining those expectations. And I know that's one of those great platitudes for, especially this early in the morning, in the morning. And I'm not suggesting that we all need to be Netflixes or digital revolutionaries, but if somebody here is the next Netflix, I would certainly love to talk to them afterwards. But we should all be committed to making sure that what we're building are things that make tomorrow, that are building towards the future. They are things that are not going to be obsolete by the time they launch. There are some things that we can do to move in this direction, and those are the things that we're going to talk about this morning. So if we're going to build the future of tomorrow, we need to understand what those users of tomorrow are like, right? And how can we know what the users of tomorrow are going to want, what they're going to need, what their expectations are going to be? And I'm a big fan of user input and qualitative and quantitative research, but there are limits to that, especially when you want to think about the future. This is a quote from Harvard Business Review. Right? Customers only know what they've experienced. They cannot imagine what they don't know about emergent technologies, new materials, and the like. What customers, for example, would have asked for the microwave oven, Velcro, or Post-it notes? This is just as relevant now as in 1984 when it was probably written, right? A lot has changed since then. There's a much simpler way to state this, and it's a quote that's attributed to Henry Ford, and that's that if I'd asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. So then, if users can't tell us what they're going to want, how do we know what to build? Has anyone seen this picture before? It's a classic, and I love it because it's relatable. It gets to a core issue in our industry. And it really gets to, on a meta level, it gets into the idea of reframing. And I think reframing is what is critical to the success of digital transformation. And first and foremost, when we're going to reframe, when we think about, and this picture is a perfect example of it, when we reframe, we need to reframe our approach and we need to stop building solutions and start fixing core user problems. If we're measuring our success on, we released 2 apps this quarter, we did X number of updates to our website, all those things, those aren't the right metrics. That's not how you're going to move your business, your industry forward. Now, I have a few examples that illustrate how following this reframe approach can really lead to revolutionary opportunities. Revolutionary opportunities are born from reframing the challenge. And the first example I have of this isn't digital at all, but I think it's a great story. Is anyone familiar with the role Coca-Cola in World War II? In 1943, the president of Coca-Cola, Robert Woodruff, made a pledge. That was just when ground actions were actually starting. He made a commitment that he wanted every U.S. soldier to be able to buy a Coke for 5 cents no matter where they were in the world and what it cost Coca-Cola. That led to mobile bottling factories that followed around divisions in Europe, Africa, Asia, the Pacific, manned by technical observers that wore U.S. military uniforms but were Coca-Cola employees, and they often served, at their peril. Literally served Coca-Cola at their peril, probably. But anyway, what's interesting though is at the end of the war they had served they distributed 5 billion servings of Coke to US soldiers. After the war, Coke, which was already an international company, the number of countries where they had bottling operations had doubled. And that American comfort food, that pause, that refreshes, that became an international symbol of freedom and liberty and America. And the takeaway for this is that Mr. Woodruff didn't say, hey, I want to increase global distribution of Coca-Cola. I want to increase, brand loyalty with our customers. He didn't define how they were going to put Coke within arm's reach of all those soldiers. What he did is he laid out a big, bold, beautiful challenge to his company that was focused on the customer. And that had incredibly long-lasting impacts. You would not have had, if anybody watches Mad Men or can remember the commercial when it was on the first time, you would not have had, I'd like to buy the world a Coke, if that had not happened and if Robert Woodruff had not made that challenge. My next almost as epic example is from another brand that often is not thought of as digital, but they have pioneered with the Internet of Things something that I think is truly magical. Now, Walt Disney, no matter how you might feel about the man, nobody can say that he lacked vision. And his company continues to carry on that legacy in their work today. And I think they actually, in carrying on that tradition, they're continuing to make magic. And in particular, first of all, let me stop. Has anyone been to Disney World in the last 5 years? So a few of you will be familiar with this, but the magic I'm talking about is the Magic Band. And it's Magic Band Plus, the system that it supports. So what happened in 2008, Meg Crofton, who's the president of Walt Disney World, they had been doing their research, and they had realized that, as you can see from this illustration, that Disney was becoming a dangerously, is how it was actually phrased, dangerously complex and transactional place. You had to have passes to get into the park. You had to have a photo pass to get your photographs sent to you later. You had to have a fast pass if you wanted to get onto rides and reserve rides. You had to have your room key. You had to have your wallet. All of these different things were contributing to Disney becoming a stressful experience. That's the last thing that they wanted, right? That's the absolute last thing they needed. So what Mr. Crofton put forward, they put together a team of 5 people from across Disney World. And they were from different departments. There were Imagineers, there were people from hospitality, there were people from lodging, from operations. And they were tasked with eliminating all the points of friction and all the pain points in the Disney experience. So they spent a couple of years researching that. And they spent time looking at, from the very moment a reservation is made to when that family shows up at the Orlando airport, when they get their bags, when they get on a bus, how they get to their first hotel to check in, how they get to the theme park, how they get to the first ride, how they get to the first restaurant. They researched all of these things, and they did it without a specific technology or solution in place. And there were lots of things they found out in that process and all those interviews and everything else that they did, that there were small things they were able to make, adjustments they were able to make in kind of the process that made improvements. But certainly the cornerstone was the Magic Band. And it was inspired by the Nike Fuel Band at the time, and just advances in RFID and other emerging technologies. And what they put together, they built on the back lot of Hollywood Studios, they built a large-scale replica workflow that mimicked this experience of had a family living room, had a baggage claim, it had the check-in desk at the hotel. They put all these components together, they prototyped, they experimented, and they eventually demoed it with all of the executives and with the board members of Disney. And it's interesting, there's a quote from one of the 5 people that were tasked, they're called the Fab Five. One of them said, at Disney, you can't just, create a PowerPoint and say, hey, give me $10 million. You have to show it to them. And in fact, they didn't just spend $10 million to build this thing, they spent $1 billion building it. They rewired the entire park with readers, all the rooms get new key readers. Now, and what they've managed to do is to really transform the experience, because now you can when you go to Disney, A week before you ever get to the airport, you've gotten your band as part of your anticipation, part of your build-up. You get to the airport, you can get straight on a bus that takes you to the theme park you want to go to. Your bags, they're going to end up at your hotel room when you get to your hotel room. You can go to that first park, you can take the rides that you've already reserved in advance. Any picture that you have taken, you think about a roller coaster, you get to that moment where you make the big plunge and they snap the picture, and everybody's excited in the family, and then you get to the end of the ride, and what do you have to do? You have to wait to see your photograph. That's what you used to have to do, and see if you wanted to buy that photograph. Now those things, all those photographs that you have taken of you, they're aggregated, and you can review them back at your room, and when you're ready, it gets you excited for the next day. But more than that, there are things like if it's your son's birthday, and he's waited in line to see Mickey Mouse, when he gets up there, when your son gets up there, Mickey Mouse knows it's his birthday. He doesn't have to wear a pin or anything else. You can take your daughter to the Be Our Guest themed, Beauty and the Beast themed restaurant, and no matter what table she chooses to sit at, her favorite meal, the thing that you've already arranged in advance, is going to find her. Now that's the way, to me, the Internet of Things should work, right? In general, that's how I would like it to be. So what they've managed to do, while this piece of technology is really interesting and it's advanced, it's those experiences that it creates, it enables. That's what makes it truly transformative and makes it magical. So I think it's important to note that these innovations they didn't start out as a challenge to, the Disney one did not start out as a challenge to say, make the parks more magical, right? With Coke, it didn't start out as make Coke an international symbol of peace and prosperity. They started out as challenges, as a problem. And they weren't just any problem. And if they had started off with those lofty goals, then the reality is the solutions that were identified, they would not have been nearly as impactful, right? There are a million ways to say, I'm going to make Disney more magical or whatever, but they would not have been as impactful. They started with a problem. But they didn't start with just any problem. They started with the right problem. So if you want to take notes, this is where you should take notes. The right problem should be, it's got to be a user problem. It should be a big problem. Little problems will get you little solutions. And it should be a problem without a solution. If part of your problem is, I need you to build an app that, or I need you to build a website that, then you've already made that too prescriptive and too limiting. And with technology today, you're probably missing out on things that could be the right solution. So we've talked about those big problems, those epic things, and a lot of us don't get to work on projects of that scale or that magnitude. But I do have some things that we can talk about that are from the real world. And I have a few examples I'd like to share from my experiences, and they're quite humble, but I'm glad to share them with you. One is, I had, as Director of Digital Experience at a marketing agency, I was flown in, to have a conversation about the post-tire purchase email cadence and the promotions that would support that. So it was the idea that someone buys a set of tires, a month later we're going to send them an email that has a coupon for Armor All or whatever. It says, here's how to make your tires, make sure your tires stay looking new. 2 months in, we're sending them things on how to check their tire pressure. Then we're sending them emails a few months later on how to check their tread levels. And then at 12 months, because you don't think past 12 months, we're going to send them a coupon to get new tires. What struck me is that most people don't need new tires after 12 months. And it made me realize that really all of the communications that we were doing for them, all of the oil changes, all those coupons we were sending them every single month, that there was a tremendous amount of waste there. And what we really needed to solve for is making sure that we were delivering those messages to those individuals, those promotional opportunities, when it was most relevant and useful for them. And that mindset really led to something that was quite interesting, quite transformative. And it was the idea of a low-cost OBD2 reader that plugs into your car, that's Bluetooth enabled, that connects to an app, that connects to a service database, that lets us be able to say, hey, you actually do need to get your oil changed. Oh, that engine light that's on, here's what that might mean. You need to get your tires, you should go get your tires inspected. All of those things, because with the OBD2, we'd know exactly how many miles had been driven, how much they leaned on their brakes, all kinds of information. That dramatically changes the nature of that relationship with the customer. I've got another example, and this one's, there are a few people in the room that will recognize this one. But it was actually for an in-store kiosk for rent-to-own. Self-service kiosks, so people that were in retail partner stores could be able to set up agreements for merchandise that they needed to take home. This assignment, this worked on an iOS device, and the assignment came in originally just as we need to port this application into something that's platform agnostic, browser based, so that we can use it on any device, and our support and everything else that goes with it goes down dramatically. But what we noticed when we really looked into it and we started to do our due diligence of estimating and scaling how long it was going to take to do that, it was a very complicated platform. And this slide is actually just for the order process. So this is where the customer is saying, you know, this is the merchandise I want to take home, describing that merchandise. And in this scenario, it would take a minimum of 6, it depended on what you chose, what you were getting, a minimum of 6 pages to add an item to your cart. And the average order was 2.3 items. So there was a lot of time being spent to do this. And so we realized that building it, making that transition, making it, you know, platform agnostic was not going to solve this problem, that it was still a difficult and unwieldy program. So we reframed that challenge, and we really thought about how can we create something that really, for these users that might not have other options, it's as simple as it can be, and it's respectful of their time and energy. And so we ended up with that for our order page, at least, and it was much nicer. And we were able to deliver it in less than half of the time that the estimate was for the original solution. So that's the kind of thing that I'd like for all of us when we get our assignments, when we get those things, when we're thinking about what we need to do, that we take that time to really to think about it and think about, are we being asked to do the right thing? Are we asking people to do the right thing? But it's not. There are a few cautionary notes I want to share before we get too far, and that's that always beware the easy answer. And I think things like those assignments that start off with build a website, build an app, those are things that can very well lead you into the wrong place. And they can set you up to build something that isn't the right answer. And I mean, there are, I think, plenty of examples of this, especially as we think about the Internet of Things and some of the other evolutions that are going on in technology. Sometimes you don't want people to have to do anything. And that gets to a really amazing point from a writer I have a tremendous amount of respect for. His name's Golden Krishna, which the name is awesome. But the user interface, no user interface is the best user interface. And he framed this up at a South by Southwest that I was at in 2013. And it's more true now than it ever was. That's really when car fobs first started coming to action. So you think about that ridiculous app I talked about. Car fob, it's just something that you slip in your pocket and your door magically opens or unlocks when you get there, right? Those are the kinds of things that are being enabled now that did not exist before. And certainly with AI and big data, we have more and more opportunities to create that intuitive future. And that's where the exciting stuff happens. One more note. I think it's important to realize that while the future is going to be beautiful, getting there is not going to be that pretty. And so be prepared to make mistakes, to embarrass yourself, to do those things, because that is important. And I want to say that everyone here can do this. And your mission, should you really choose to accept it, is to reframe assignments onto solving problems. Big, unbiased user problems. With yourself, with your teams, with your vendors, with your clients, with your partners. And because if you don't do that, the best you're ever really going to get is meeting expectations. And you're never going to really get to create something that is truly magical. And that's what I want for all of you. Thank you. Well, I know everybody's got other sessions to get to, unless I should certainly say, again, should anyone have a challenge or want some help kind of reframing things for themselves, for their teams, please don't hesitate to reach out. I would be glad to help in any way. Thank you very much, and have a great Friday.